Start off.
There you go.
Okay. Hey everyone, Lilith here with Triple Waterways, introducing to you my dear friend and brother, Jeremiah Pearcey, who is the founder of Cosmi Technologies, excuse me.
Yeah, hi everyone. Yeah, we do a lot of work with stress and changing perspectives and things around that. So hopefully we can give you some insight today on yourselves and have a good conversation.
Absolutely. And so one of the things that JP, that's what I like to call him, JP and I have been talking about is what is it looking like in terms of stress and trauma, essentially, for our LGBTQIA plus community right now in America. So JP, can you give us a little bit of a breakdown of what you think from a psychologist's perspective of how this is affecting our communities?
Yeah, well, there are a lot of different ways that this is affecting communities, right? Because we're not just talking about this affecting people. This is affecting legislation. This is affecting rules and laws, the governance of people. And that in and of itself is a whole other issue when you kind of extricate it from the LGBTQ issue. Then you have the personal or interpersonal issues that they are dealing with now, because they are to a large extent being attacked across the country. And you see a lot of different focuses for this. So I currently reside in Houston, Texas, and Texas is one of the states that's going after the LGBTQ community, as they've passed legislation recently that's banning affirmative care for minors. So now um, they're no longer supporting minors transition, uh, even if that's what the child wants, even what the family has decided with their doctor, um, and counselors, because this is an extensive process. It's not like you walk into a hospital and are like, just give me hormones and it happens. Like, it's a process that people have to go through, and it can be fairly extensive, especially when you're talking about the variance from state to state. So then we have that aspect and how that affects not just the LGBTQIA individual, but their family as well. Because now this is a family journey. So now this person's mother and father have to decide, well, where are we going to do this? Where is this going to take us? Do we need to move to even give our child a life that is comfortable, that is appropriate for them? So that's a very complicated question, and I think there's a whole bunch of different aspects, and I haven't even, hardly touched on it. So,
Absolutely.
excuse me.
So many layers to it, so many layers. So if we were to start from, legislation, with the small bit that you shared with us, let's take it to the next layer of community, and then let's take it to the next layer to the person, because I think people need to connect these dots. And I think that's where sometimes it goes amiss, where people aren't connecting the dot of here's the law that's being pushed forth we see the individual, but how is that deepening that effect? And how is that going from the micro to the macro? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. So you're saying, like, how is this kind of trickle down effect of legislation creating micro issues in those communities? Is that
Yeah,
what you're
so
asking?
right, it's micro issues, but also with all the micro issues now becomes a larger macro issue, because now we're also seeing, right, that there's violence against our transgender community in ways where we already know exists. We already know this exists, but now it's ramped up in a very loud, overt way that is terrifying
Yeah.
for our trans relatives, and especially our trans relatives of color, because they are our most affected.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and that's a whole other aspect of not just being trans, but being a trans person of color. You know, because then you're dealing with the issues of color on top of the issues of transphobia and things like that. Uh, but yeah, I mean, that's a great question to kind of explore. And I would say that, well, first, I think it's important to start with why, right? Because this didn't come out of nowhere. There's been constant, persistent attacks on the trans community for pretty much their entire existence in this country.
Yeah.
Um, so why recently is this coming out? Like, we've had trans people for a while. The only differences are really the perspectives in which society views these people, right? Because over the last 10, 20 years, there has been support. So there's been support. We've noticed that not just people and individuals are supporting these communities, but now there are organizations and businesses that are supporting these communities. And for whatever reason, we could hypothesize reasons as to why, but this has created backlash. And this has created backlash, especially recently after Bud Light's collaboration uh, with, I forget the individual's name. Do you remember her name?
Not off the top of my
Okay.
head.
Anyways, that collaboration with Dylan Mulvaney. There we go. With Dylan Mulvaney, uh, and that and the interesting thing is that this wasn't the first time a major beer distributor or creator even supported the trans community, right? There's been multiple distributors and manufacturers of different beers that have put the pride flag on their cans, put the trans flag on their cans, and voiced support for those communities. So really, what I think this has become is this has become a kind of political ploy to induce hate. Because when you lose or are losing, people get upset, right? So what you want to do if you are the losing team is you want to rile up the base, so it were. And to do that, you need a focal point, right?
Mhm.
So, you know, throughout the years, it was focal points on people of color. We've had it on Japanese, on Black people, on Chinese. And I mean, it expands pretty much every race has, in some point in this country's history, probably been discriminated against. Uh, and so this is just another tool or tactic for a group of people to use another group as a scapegoat, right? Then you can just attribute all the issues, all the things that are going wrong in the world to that group. So, for example, you probably will see, if you haven't already, there's a big push against trans folk being demonic or in some ways non-Christian just for being trans. Even though in the Bible there's really no mention of trans people because they probably didn't really exist back then, although there were still men and women that probably dressed the opposite of the gender in which they were born. So it's not even that weird, and actors and actresses have done this through the centuries, and they've given themselves personas, and sometimes people do it just out of comfort.
Yeah.
So this isn't something new that just came out of nowhere. Like, these kinds of ideologies and behaviors are common for humans. So, in my opinion, this is definitely just a way to rile up supporters in the most uh, I want to say energetic way, because hate takes a lot of energy. It's a big movement of energy, but it is effective because if you can get somebody to hate something, they don't need a reason or even evidence to support that hateful thought or that hateful perspective, right? Once you have that hate already in you, no matter what somebody says to you, just comes in one ear and out the other. So that's kind of my perspective as far as the why this is all starting, that this is a political tool.
It is a political too. And hate also goes hand in hand with ignorance.
Absolutely.
It goes
Absolutely.
hand in hand with ignorance. People today, I think, lack the ability or the will, if I think maybe for even a better word, to do a deeper analytical deep dive into the why. It's easier for
Mhm.
people to go by quick sound bites like this and go, oh, well, that's what it is. Or I saw it on Wikipedia, it's the truth, than to actually do the research to find out what's true or not. Because when we really look at the statistics, it's not trans persons who are a danger to our society. It's actually white male Christians that are a danger to society, statistically speaking.
Mhm.
Let's balance this out, right? Transgender people want to go to the bathroom, leave them alone. But yet we keep seeing pedophilia cases time and time again come out, including with our politicians who have cases of rape, molestation, indecent anything. But yet they seem to be able to, skate on these things. So it's almost the same way, like I kind of see it remember in middle school when the bully would play the victim, when the person who was being bullied would finally stand up and be like, knock your crap off, and
Mhm.
also the victim. It's the same concept in my mind, anyways, that these bullies are now trying to cry victim because there's a bunch of us who are standing up saying, hey, your behavior is inappropriate. No, thank you. Go to your room and think about your life.
Yeah.
And that's really all it is. Like, they're trying to make a whole thing as well, with people of color. Oh, well, they're going to take over and then we're going to be the minority and then we're going to be treated the way, oh, I don't know, the way you guys have treated us. No, actually, and the truth is, we just want to be left alone to live a peaceful, happy life, prosperous life within our communities, to take care of each other in mutual aid. Can you just please step aside? Right. And I really feel on a lot of levels that's the same message coming through that I've seen with the LGBTQ community, which is just like, stop. We're not rolling back to the 80s.
Mhm.
Rolling back to the 80s, as we remember, they were calling AIDS a gay disease. For what reason? Maybe because it was easier not to invest the money to actually help the situation. It was easier to scapegoat them as it being a gay disease to actually invest the money to serve a higher purpose. It's just like cancer. Breast cancer is one of the lowest researched things. Doesn't seem like it to anyone from the outside, but in truth is, there's not a whole lot of money that actually goes into it. It's a moneymaker
Yeah.
for these ultra pharmaceutical companies that have all banded together into mega corporations. And then that's again another trickle down, but that's
Yeah.
another thought.
Well, and that's, I think, the interesting thing is that now corporations have gotten themselves involved in the social aspects, as well as in political aspects of society. So it, but it's really not that weird, because if you look back, at the turn of the 20th century, so slavery was abolished, in the 19th century, but a lot of those mechanisms that helped keep Black people enslaved were utilized in other ways.
Mhm.
And so when you get to the turn of the 20th century, what we find is that corporations and businesses partnered with police stations and sheriff's offices to buy Black people, or to buy people that were imprisoned for whatever reason. And that's a whole other issue, that they would arrest people for the most random reasons just to have them as stock, so they could sell them to a company, and they would just send them off to mines. And it actually got worse. So that form of slavery was worse than the previous slavery, because slave owners, only had so much money and so many slaves, and so they took care of them to some extent, at least the less wealthy ones. But when you see them move into corporations and the corporate world, they cared not at all. So
Mhm.
they would buy them cheap, and if they died, they died. And
Yep.
so now we've kind of seen that grow and expand. But corporations are still, the center of this issue because they give money. They give money to politicians, they give support to politicians, they post things on their social media and have an outreach to millions of people.
Mhm.
So what they say and what they do impact our communities extensively. And when you tie that into politicians like here in Texas, like Ted Cruz, that wanted an investigation into Bud Light because they partnered with a trans person.
Yeah.
That alone just shows the power. And the fact that then Bud Light kind of recants their support, they kind of push it under the rug. And then other companies start doing the same thing, like Target, which was very disappointing to see that a company that has been so pro and supportive of the LGBTQIA communities um, walk back that even a little bit. It just shows how this bullying tactic is working and how this hate, this system of hate is grabbing more and more people, kind of just sweeping them up into the system. Um,
Mhm.
but they don't care now.
Yeah.
It's not profitable now for them to support the community, and so you see them giving away their support, and that
Mhm.
to me is really disheartening. Um, Throughout this whole thing is
Yeah.
that when tested, people walk back their comments and support.
Yeah. The performative allyship is very damaging,
Mm,
very damaging because, and I think also just speaking from a personal level, I'm sure you've experienced the same, where we've had friends that have expressed their support, whether of us being people of color or how we walk in this world, and all of a sudden they're challenged by the greater society, and then they suddenly go silent or they roll it back, and it leaves you with having trust issues, which compounds the trauma that we already face as people of color or living in the LGBTQIA community. So that just compounds into complex PTSD. And I think, again, that's something that, PTSD wasn't even a diagnosis until, recent years, to be honest. And now we have complex PTSD that isn't in DMS yet. And we're still learning the understandings of that complexity of it, right? So we wonder why people are behaving in strange ways, or, they say, oh, here's an example. So there was a gentleman that was murdered in New York on a subway. He was put in a headlock. I don't remember his name offhand, but he was an impersonator of Michael Jackson. I do remember that much. About a 30-year-old man, Black man. And he was put in a headlock by a 24-year-old Marine who claimed that he was being a danger. The only danger is that he was yelling, that he was hungry, that he was thirsty, that he was houseless. That was it. But that fear factor or that power theme steps in now amongst individuals where they think they're going to take it into their own hands and harm somebody else. So we look at, and the people standing around are taking video rather than actually being an ally to say, hey, you're hurting him. And that's true allyship at the end of the day, right? At the end of the day, we stand up for each other. Again, the middle school play yard, we stand up for each other. We say, you're hurting my friend, please stop. And I think that's where things go amiss of, are you going to be afraid and let harm come to your friend? Are you really a friend? What does that mean?
yeah.
Are you an ally? Are you a co-conspirator? Are you an accomplice? those are different words. You know, like you've known me long enough to know when I say I have your six, I have your six, regardless of the risk to me,
Mm-hmm.
because that is what a friend does. And I think that's where people fail in understanding what allyship is that, yeah, you are taking a risk, but you're taking that risk for what is right, what is truthful, what is just, and what is equity.
Yeah.
I think that's where we get disappointed when we're looking at corporations. We're like, yes, thank you, because of their capacity of their voice. But then
Yeah.
also they strip it because of their fear. You're kind of left with like, well, did you mean it? What kind of friend are you? And then it shakes our own self-worth.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Uh, and it's unfortunate that this has become US society. And really, to your point, I think a lot of the issues that we do see are perpetuated by fear.
Mhm.
But if the fear and how it's used, I think got out of control. And I don't think it was meant to get as far out of control as it has gotten. But it was found to be a useful tool, and they just started spreading fear about everything. I mean, not even just about the LGBTQ community. We're talking about the immigrant community. We're talking about the fear of the government coming into play, fear that our elections are balanced and fair, fear of what will happen if we actually implement climate policy, right? There is so much fear being perpetuated instead of support or allying oneself and trying to find solutions.
Yeah,
And that's one of the most disappointing things, is that people are now so sensitive to fear and those different components that cause us to react more than just to think and really play through what this means for us and what our behavior and what our emotions mean. And so now you just have people that react. So that guy on the subway supposedly defended himself, for because this person was yelling. But we have other cases too, like the young lady that was shot getting into the wrong truck. Guy's first response was to shoot somebody out of fear, right? And there's a number of cases, even children getting shot at doors, knocking on the wrong door
walked in the wrong
out
door.
of
Yeah,
fear. And so they created this fear tactic to convince people to vote or to ally with them, um, because of the fear that they're perpetuating. But what has happened is it's gotten out of control, where now people are just reacting in fear no matter what. And that is a very dangerous position to be in for all of us. I mean, now there's shootings all the time, so we have that fear on top of the other fear um, being pushed. And I think it hurts all of us as a society, and ultimately it doesn't help us improve society.
right.
Spreading fear and hate is not going to help us figure this out, to make our country safer, to make it more supportive or equitable. Not that everybody cares about those things, but we should.
We
We
should.
should.
We should. The United States has always been toting this whole land of the brave and unity.
Yeah.
Where's the unity? We're all here, right? Excuse me. But going back to what you're saying about fear, though, I mean, I really believe this fear also was the foundation of our US government. Because 12 million indigenous people, more than that actually, were murdered.
Mm-hmm.
Their land was taken. We're all guests on stolen land in the big things. Or we have our enslaved ancestors that were dragged over here against their will and their descendants, right? So, pardon me. So from that end of it, our government in a lot of ways is functioning exactly the way it was designed. And they've perpetuated it to an extreme place now
Mm.
to try to revert it back to what was.
Yeah.
I mean, we actually have neo-Nazis and fascists marching out in khakis and matching shirt and masks. That's horrifying. How's that any different than the Ku Klux Klan?
Yeah.
Right? There's no difference in it. And so, but yet it's allowable somehow. So that mindset has continued to exist even as far back as the foundation of this government.
Yeah.
I think there's on some levels it's prevalent because it's also social media. We also have a modern technology now that allows us to see faster in a wider capacity of what's really happening across from west to east and from north to south of the country.
Yeah, I think, and to your point about the founding of the country, I think that has a lot to do with the culture that developed. So, as far as societies are concerned, we have high context cultures, particularly Asian cultures that are very rich culturally. They have a lot of customs and cultures. There is a lot of history to those countries and what led to them existing in this modern world. But then we have low context cultures like the United States and a lot of Western countries, in Europe and Great Britain and things like that, that are more individualistic. They pride themselves on being an individual that sometimes participates in society versus being an individual that is participatory in society, and that's your role as a person in that country. So when I lived in Tokyo, when I was just a teenager, one of the things that I always loved about the Japanese people, and I don't know if they still do this today, but at the time, every Sunday, everybody would leave their apartment, they would walk down to the streets, and they would pick up the trash around their area where they lived. Just pick it up, put it in a bag. So you'd always see people walking around. They had little poker sticks. They pick it up, put it in their bag. Their streets were always clean. But that's kind of what we're talking about, because they're participating in society. You are part of that. In the United States, that's not the case. It's all about you first, and if you have something left over, you can maybe give it to other people. But it's all about individualism. And I think that is one of the more significant problems in our country, because it is focused on me. What do I want? Do I care what anybody else wants? If you're that kind of person, you don't need to. You don't have to care. You don't have to care if there are people being hunted down for the words that you've said. You don't have to care that your words spark a riot and, have people invade the Capitol. You don't have to care if you are saying anything that's factual or not. You can spread hate, and that's okay, because this helps me. It helps me and the people that I want to help, and it doesn't help anybody else. Right? So we've created this individualistic society and then somehow split it into two parties, which makes no sense at all, because now it's just warring parties. Right? So on either side, they're always arguing about the other side, whether it's true or not, because in many cases they just make it up on a whim because it sells, right? Because again, going back to the individualism, you don't care.
Yeah.
The ramifications don't matter as long as it helps you. And so that kind of has perpetuated this, because then if you are only worried about you and somebody says they're going after you and everybody you love, well, who do you care about? You. and the people that you love. So you'll do whatever. You'll do whatever they ask. If you believe that, then you are in hook, line, and sinker. And that is what we have now. People that don't even understand what they're voting for, that don't even understand how they're impacting society as a whole and creating the exact thing that they fear. The
Yep.
fear of like them being hunted down, attacked, losing their job, all of that. They are creating the environment to have this happen to them. And it really blows my mind.
It's actually funny that you say that. Everything that you literally just described is the devil card in tarot. That's the devil card.
Selfishness.
Selfishness.
It's the
Selfishness
crux of it all.
is the crux of everything. Yet we are supposed to be a predominantly Christian society. I don't think Jesus would approve of what's happening right now.
Yeah.
Call me crazy.
Yeah. Jesus wouldn't approve, but you can find a pastor that will.
Right, because, you know, he's already sold himself to the devil because of all the money that he brings in.
Yeah.
Then fine. He's probably going to drive off in his Mercedes too after, you know, Lord knows,
Yep.
committed the act of pedophilia, because that's pretty common.
Yep.
But let's go back. Are LGBTQIA the danger? No, I don't think so.
Yeah. I mean, you could make that case across the board if you look at churches and where kids are most molested and
Yep.
and sexually assaulted. We know that it tends to be in those kinds of institutions because they have access and nobody
Questions it.
questions it. Because
Nobody
he's a good
questions it.
person. You know,
They're
they're
a
a good
person of
person.
God.
Yeah.
So I told you to do that. No, I don't think so.
Yeah.
I was that 10-year-old in confession because I was raised Roman Catholic. I'm a recovering Catholic. And I would be that 10-year-old that would have a million questions for the priest until they would kick me out. And that was one of the questions. Tell me why. They didn't want to talk about it. They're like, get out of here.
Yeah, it's hard to bring logic into that equation.
Especially when it's coming from a child.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
like, "Yeah, I'm going to call you out. Hold on a minute."
Yeah, so it's really interesting how we got ourselves here. I don't really know if we can get ourselves out. I mean, I do think that this opposition to the trans community, I think you were saying this earlier, I mean, it's not going to happen. Trans people aren't going to go away. Like,
Yeah.
they're going to exist. And now that we have the technology to support those kinds of lifestyles and changes, it's going to keep growing. And
Yeah.
people are going to find better techniques, better methods to do this, better ways to integrate a person. And they're just going to have to deal with it. So they're throwing up their hands and creating a ruckus, but at the end of the day, you're not getting rid of people of color. You're not getting rid of trans people. You're not getting rid of gay people. They are always going to exist, and it's your choice whether you want to support and show love or if you want to spread dissent and hate.
I think that is the clearest message right there, JP. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
And is there any messages that, in terms of support for ourselves, for our communities that are under attack right now, from your expert position, especially with stress being the highlight of Cosmi, what can you offer communities, individuals at this point to help their nervous systems bring back calm so that they can walk in this world in a way where their self-worth can be healed?
Yeah. Great question. So there are a lot of things that individuals can do for themselves. The number one thing, I think, is figure out what is causing you stress. Because most people have never sat down and just said, okay, Does my family cause me stress? Does going to work cause me stress? Do I sometimes get stressed when I'm going to school or writing a paper, or maybe when I have to cook after a long day? You know, we don't sit here and analyze our lives to know what is causing us stress. So first things first, figure that out. Like, what in your life is causing you stress? What in your life can you get rid of immediately to reduce that stress? So, it first takes a kind of assessment, and I liken it to getting your car fixed, right? If your car engine is smoking, you can't fix it unless you actually look under the hood and figure out what is the problem, right? The same is true for mental health. If you are struggling, but you just, I don't know, take a pill, go to therapy, but you don't take the time to actually understand why you are struggling with that thing, then you will likely never find an answer because you haven't looked under the hood to really know. And sometimes it is scary.
Mhm.
People can get anxious doing those kinds of things because a lot of times the thing causing problems is not welcome. It's not comfortable. But we also have to understand that you're never going to get past it and move into a space where you can heal and mend from that if you don't understand what is going on. So that's number one. First thing, figure out what's going on in your world. Second, I would say find some tools and techniques that work for you. We talked earlier about using different kinds of sound
Mhm.
to help. I use a lot of different kinds of sound because sound itself can create a sense of belonging, but it can also bring a sense of peace and compassion depending on the music that you're listening to. So various kinds of music, something like binaural beats is great for if you need to really just chill out, get to sleep. But maybe you don't really need to chill out and get to sleep. Maybe you just want to feel connected. So for me, something like African drumming is
Mm.
wonderful. I can just sit there, I can feel the drum beats, rising up my spine, and I just let the music take me. And that can be so powerful and connective, especially for somebody like me that doesn't have an ancestry. My ancestors were slaves. I don't know where they came from really. Somewhere on the west coast of Africa, but I didn't get that culture. So for me, tapping into something like African drumming helps me connect with that culture. It helps me connect with that identity, helps me feel more like me. So, that's different for everybody. So whatever it is for you, find some kind of music or sounds that you can get into. And then third, I think the most important thing that you can do on a daily basis is practice breathing. Because through breath, a lot of our hormones are created or excreted. And learning how to control your breath will help you learn how to control your mind as well. Because
Mhm.
it's discipline. It's about discipline. It's about sitting with yourself in a way that you haven't sat with yourself before, and finding that comfort that will help you relax and stay calm and maybe even gain some insight into yourself and your body. And breath is one of the most powerful ways that we can alter that. So, explore the different kinds of breath techniques. I prefer one called resonance frequency breathing, which is a 5-second inhale and a 5-second exhale. There's no hold. You just continually breathe 5 seconds up, 5 seconds down. And after a minute, you should feel nice and relaxed, feeling calmer, and things like that. So those are three items that I would recommend for dealing with stress when it comes to this. But ultimately, it's figuring out what works best for you.
I love that. Thank you so much. Thank you so
Absolutely, my
much
pleasure.
for all of your wisdom that you have shared today. I think it's very important to hear your voice on this matter, your knowledge on this matter, because obviously you've you have dived deep, my friend. PhD programs are not that easy.
Yeah, I mean, for both of us, fortunate to have crossed paths and under this umbrella of humanistic psychology. So,
For sure, for sure. It's always a gift to be able to meet minds with you, JP. It's always a beautiful thing.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me, Lilith. It was great. Great conversation.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So folks, reach out to Dr. Pearcey, JP, as I like to call him, through Cosmi Thought Technology. He is amazing at what he does and the way his brain functions around stress, around the world that we live in, and all of the different layers of life that all of us are walking through and how we can actually walk together.
Absolutely. Yeah, please go to my website, cosmi.llc. You can find us on social media, on Instagram, as well as on Facebook. We're going to be producing our own podcast, and we'll have a lot of video content being posted over the next few months. So follow us, and we hope to see you there.
Super exciting. So thanks, everyone. Triple Waterways here. Holler at me if you need your readings, if you need some consultation, and we will be talking again soon.